Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
This is perhaps the most requested story of all time regarding RVs on my channel. Mark sent me a note this morning, said, Steve, check out this version of it. And it's all over the internet, but much of it has been in YouTube videos. And this, however, is from autoevolution.com. Christian Kermai wrote this, a very well-written and thoughtful piece about a couple from Canada who bought an RV that cost more than $1.3 million, and they've hit a problem and possibly a lawsuit with the government being involved. And the government we're talking about here is the U.S. government. But again, they're from Canada. They bought a 2022 Newmar King Air 4531 for no less than $1.35 million. They've owned it for 3 years. They love the thing. And in fact, they have raved about how well they were treated by the manufacturer of the RV. But they decided to sell it. So selling a vehicle that large and expensive is difficult, but they found a buyer in Arizona. They made arrangements for a driver to come out to the Canada border and pick up the unit and take it to Arizona. This is where things went sideways, as we like to say. At the border, an officer said, your broker's filled out the wrong documents. This vehicle is not compliant for importation. I think the stickers are fraudulent. Now, here's the problem. This thing came from America. Newmar is located in Indiana. The chassis manufacturer that's going to get mentioned is from Charlotte, Michigan. In fact, I know them quite well. I've sued them before, but another story altogether. So they did get through the border, and the driver took the vehicle down towards Arizona. But a couple days later, Brian gets a phone call from Customs saying they need to bring the RV back to the border because there's an issue they want to look at. And if you don't bring it back, there's a fine of 3 times the value of the vehicle. So they're basically saying to import the vehicle, there's rules you got to follow. And one of the rules is bring it back. Let's take a look at it because there's a problem. At the border, the agents seized the RV and they actually sent Brian home with his tow vehicle. And the question is, what's going on here? Because they'd crossed the border before many, many times. The issue, of course, is when you're crossing the border and you say, I'm just visiting, vacationing in America, just driving around, that's one thing. But when you say we're crossing the border to sell the vehicle here, suddenly you are importing it. Now that you're importing something into America, more scrutiny happens. So there are tightened regulations at the border about imports. And so officers are taking extra steps to make sure everybody's compliant. 20 days later, Brian was informed the coach could not enter the U.S. You are denied entry into the U.S. So now, here's where the story starts getting a little shaky. The man still wants to sell the unit. So he reaches out to Newmar and says, guys, here's what happened. He tells them the whole story. And they say, oh, okay, we'll help you. And apparently they found him a dealer in Florida who said, I'll buy the vehicle from you. Just get it here. So the man who owns the RV decides to bring it across the border at Buffalo. And I've made that crossing before. It's a very scenic crossing, as you might imagine. So he was immediately flagged, pulled into an office, and they questioned him. Why are you trying to cross again when this unit's been flagged? It's been flagged. So what is going on here? So Brian and an official NHTSA inspector started to look for the vehicle's vehicle identification number to ensure that everything was in order, but they couldn't find one anywhere on the chassis. There was not a permanent and non-tamperable VIN anywhere, no etchings or plates anywhere either. And as you might know in automobiles, there's always a VIN tag at the base of the A-pillar on the driver's side that you can usually see by looking from the outside of the car through the window glass, okay? Usually. And federal law requires them and says that you got to use these special kinds of non-tamperable things. But also, most modern vehicles have the VIN in more than one place. So it's often stamped on the frame. It's often stamped on like a firewall or something. And sometimes it's stamped in more than one place on the frame. Depends on the kind of vehicle. They did find portions of a VIN or VIN stickers in 3 non-compliant areas in the RV. And so federal law says, here's where you should put them to make them count. And here they had one behind the driver's seat on a wall panel. There's one in a cupboard and one at the rear of the RV, but they said those aren't proper. Meanwhile, Brian contacts the president of Newmar, who's the guy who said, I found you a dealer in Florida. And the guy from Newmar asks the inspector, well, where should we put the stickers? And apparently the inspector told them, you're the manufacturer. It's not my job to educate you on how to manufacture your vehicle. And this is one of those things. I remember a story years and years and years ago about people who are entering a race in Europe. And they have this process you go through before the race where they inspect your vehicle. And they inspect your vehicle and they say, okay, we inspected it. We think you're good to go. And just as the race is about to start, an inspector is walking down the starting grid and he spots something and he goes, oh, your vehicle is non-compliant. And the driver and the team go, but we passed the inspection yesterday. And the inspector goes, yeah, but we caught something today that does not pass inspection. And the driver goes, yeah, but we passed. And the inspector goes, it's not our job to catch you. It's your job to be compliant. And that's what the inspector from NHTSA is telling them. And so they should know that. So after that call, the NHTSA inspector informed the owner of the RV that because of the lack of any permanent VIN anywhere on the frame or chassis, the vehicle is now going to be seized. So the owner reached out to Newmar, and apparently at that point, communication broke down. So now the owner says he's talking to lawyers, trying to get in touch with the manufacturer to see if they can't work something out. But in the meantime, and by the way, I underlined this paragraph to make sure I hit it nice and hard. In the meantime, Brian received a notice of penalty from the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, for $660,000 for trying to cross without a compliant vehicle. Please pay now. You may use a credit card. $660,000. So the U.S. Customs agents had been working, trying to figure out what's going on. And somewhere along the line, the owner was informed that a supervisor went to a nearby Newmar dealer and inspected 4 other units looking for VINs, all of which were found in the same state as the VINs on this man's vehicle. And so apparently a border agent mentioned to the owner that the U.S. government might be looking into Newmar on a larger scale. So here's the problem. And I mentioned earlier that the Newmar RV is on a Spartan chassis. And that's not uncommon. There's companies that make chassis, companies that make drivetrains, and then there's companies that build the unit that goes on top of these things. And Spartan is a very, very well-known manufacturer of RV chassis. And they're in a place called Charlotte, Michigan. It looks like Charlotte, but it's pronounced Charlotte. We don't know why. It just is. And so Spartan apparently, in these cases, only etches part of the VIN on the RV chassis. But that's not enough. It must be the full-length VIN, which is more than 5 digits. Okay? So it's unclear now if the government's going after Newmar. That's the kind of thing they wouldn't exactly announce until they did something. But the question is really, what's going on here? And so if you buy an RV from anybody, you should probably check the VIN and say, where's the VIN tag? I want to see a VIN tag. So in this case, the couple contacted Liz Amazing, who's got a YouTube channel, and she's the one to put up the video, and I've had 1 million people send me links to that video. They contacted her. She got the word out. Her video is going insane right now, and that's good because this is a crazy concept. And, you know, I've bought some vehicles in the last few years, and I've looked at the glass and looked through the windows to see what the VIN said. A few years ago, I actually bought a vehicle where somebody fat-fingered one of the digits on the certificate of title the application for that. And so when I got the title, I'm looking at it, and it didn't match the VIN on the car. And it's a very, very complicated story as to how I figured this out, but I did figure it out. I can also tell you that some cars occasionally have VINs in other places, but the car companies are very good with that now. They know these things. And so the VIN on a car, like I said, you check the one underneath the glass at the A-pillar, but there's going to be others on the car. And I've told you before about people who've cloned VINs where they've taken a stolen car and taken the VIN off something else and put it on this car. That's another thing, again, altogether. But here, the fact that the unit doesn't have a VIN in the appropriate place with the full length vehicle identification number is a problem. And NHTSA is very picky about that. And so in the old days, and of course, if you've seen Rain Man, you'll recall that there's a subplot about Tom Cruise's character trying to get cars into America that have the wrong types of instrumentation on them, because that used to be a big deal about having the speedometer and odometer read in miles rather than kilometers. And so that used to be what we talk about with vehicles being brought in from Canada, because you had to just, in the old days, you had to swap out instrument clusters and put stickers on the door and stuff. But here, it's kind of wild, because you would just assume a $1.35 million RV wouldn't have a problem like this, because this is, as you can imagine, something pretty straightforward, and when you build an RV that elaborate, that expensive, that complicated, and then, oh, by the way, there's a problem because the VIN tag isn't where it's supposed to be, if there is one, is something you'd never imagine being the problem. And so I've known many, many people who bought RVs this expensive or less, a couple more expensive, and usually it's more a matter of, oh no, we had like a 3-hour walkthrough as somebody was showing us how everything worked and where everything was and all of this stuff. And it wouldn't occur to you like, oh, by the way, now that I've seen the full-size stand-up shower and the granite countertops, can we check the VIN tag? It wouldn't occur to you. So right now, I assure you there are people in the audience who own RVs who are going to say, wait a second, have I ever checked the VIN tag in our vehicle? I don't know. Crazy case, but Mark, thanks for tipping me off. And to Christian Kermai, who wrote this for AutoEvolution.com, and of course for Liz Amazing for bringing a story to the broader public. Coupled $1.35 million RV stumbles upon huge possible lawsuit. The government is involved. And the scariest part of all is that there's a notice of penalty from the U.S. government for $660,000. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. When you try your best and you don't succeed, when you get what you want, but not what you need.